Hey, it's April, and today I'm going to be making a humanoid mushroom. I've made a whole bunch of outfitted characters, so I fancy doing something a little bit different, more of a fully sculpted creature type character, so it's kind of in between a doll and a figurine. And I thought a fun theme would be mushrooms. They are so weirdly wonderful, so many of them look completely alien, especially the really tiny ones, so it's simply impossible to not get super inspired by them. And since I'm a sucker for a gloomy character, I'm going to start with INKY, based on a shaggy ink cap shroom. And this is the design I landed on, a nice blend of creepy, cute, and gooey. So now that I've got a clean base, let's get started. I marked where I want her eyes to be, and then sliced off her lips and nose to make sculpting easier. I then cut out the eye holes as I wanted to have really big, bulgy insert eyes. I was worried the face still wasn't quite flat enough, so I sanded it down some more. I also put a layer of Apoxie Sculpt around the inside of the head. This will give me a solid base to work on, rather than the soft vinyl smushing inwards every time I apply pressure, making the epoxy just bounce off. Now I can smush a blob of epoxy into place and smooth it out with a ball tool. And my finger dipped in some water until the face is fully clayed up. Add some eyebrow looking chunks of clay to build up the eye sockets and help the eyes look nice and sunken into the face, not just stuck on top. And a cute little nose. Or a shape that gives the impression of one, anyway. I pushed some pre-baked Fimo balls into the eye holes to get a better idea of how she will look, and then sliced off the ears too. Smooth out some worms of epoxy for eyelids. And some extra puffy, oversized eye bags, as they are an essential trait of any gloomy character. Oh, and I also added an eyeliner-shaped strip above her eyes that I imagine would be the mushroom equivalent of eyelashes. After skewering the head with some toothpicks, I can add some little chunky ears. I sometimes struggle sculpting ears with epoxy. It gets annoying having to wait for hours between layers, so I use some Fimo instead. Pop them off to bake, and then just reattach them with a little strip of epoxy. It probably doesn't sound it, but it was actually much easier. I'm happy with the sculpting, so it's time for a day of sanding, which apparently doesn't look much different on camera, but I assure you it makes a huge difference. And sanded the body smooth. Bulked out the feet with some hot glue, and then used epoxy to build up the actual foot shape. I'm going for random blobby shapes rather than actual feet, as I want it to look like the goo naturally clumped together so she can walk. Plus shrooms tend to have that bulgy bulb at the base of the stalk, although they ended up looking slightly hoof-like, to be honest. And I aggressively press them into the table to make sure the bottom's nice and flat, as I like my dolls to be able to stand up. It's satisfying, and it makes photos a whole lot easier as well. After smoothing the epoxy up the legs a little bit, I started adding the little flappy bits. I know her body would technically be the stalk, but I thought it would be fun to mimic the shaggy texture of the cap on the body too, only I'll be keeping these parts smooth so that they look like they're made from the same flesh as the stalk, rather than the stringy cap texture. I'm also giving her 2 rings instead of 1, as I wanted it to sit below the knee, and having it on just one leg would look kind of strange. Whilst the legs are curing, let's make some arms. I took a couple of balls of foil that will be the hands, pushed wires into place for the fingers, and a toothpick handle so that I actually have something to hold. I then used Fimo to build up the shape. I wanted to create something creepy and unsettling for the hands, organic shapes, but unnatural looking at the same time. Plus, as you may have noticed from a couple of my Seven Sins dolls, I'm a huge fan of character designs with disproportionately long arms. So I decided to go with 3 long goopy digits. Think salad fingers, but goo. After smoothing out with isopropyl alcohol and baking, I attached them to the doll hands with hot glue. This way I don't lose any articulation. Then added more flappy bits, like on the legs, to blend into her arm. I like how it looks like the goo has pushed its way out of the arm, like petals opening when a flower blooms. I made sure to keep moving the joints to make sure none of the flaps are in the way. And that's the arm sorted. The flap sticking out makes it look like something should shoot out of her wrists. Maybe she could have ink cannons, some sort of escape mechanism like a squid. Anyway, back to the body. I'm using epoxy to make the edges of each part frilly rather than a clean line. Hopefully it'll give a more organic feel. And some more frills for no other reason than I thought it would be really cute to give her a frilly mushroom butt. Get rid of the belly button, as a mushroom doesn't really require one. And even more flaps, because why not? And after another sanding session, the body is finally complete. However, I'm a bit worried about the bright white joints looking odd, so before I paint her, I'm going to soak the body in tea to try and stain the plastic a little bit. I could have used dye, but I don't have any to hand and I was unsure on colours, whereas I have an abundance of tea, so why not try something different? After letting her soak for 24 hours-ish, it's definitely made a difference. Admittedly, it stained the clay in my fingernails way better, but I'm still really happy with the results. So let's push out her eyeballs and start painting. I covered the clay areas with a neutral base and haphazardly applied bits to the plastic, whilst avoiding joints so that I don't have to deal with paint chipping later on. Add some white texture lines on top. Cover the lower legs in a cool grey-brown. And solid black for the feet. Splatter some more brown for dirt and texture. Apply an extremely watery brown for various dirty, mouldy patches and holes and whatnot. Basically, just really trying to maximise the texture. I also like to include graphic line art elements within my paint jobs, so I'm covering the flap edges with an off-white. And grey on the feet. but now the rings look kind of flat, so more white is required. Which I carried on adding to all the edges. And around some of the markings to give them more depth. Gave her face a warm wash as it didn't quite match the body. Then went in with a muted pink on her ears, waterline and nose. Just for a little colour variation, since some of the photos I gathered had slight pinkish patches. And it makes her look slightly like a cow, which I think is super cute. I'm adding some of the grey brown to the darker areas of her face. And lining her eyes with black. A few more spots and edge highlights. Sketch the eye creases. Paint over them. Now you might be thinking, but wait, she's missing a mouth. And yeah, you'd be correct, but you see, it's not required here as INKY is non-verbal. She's a quiet, solitary creature, but for those extra special people that she takes a liking to, she can communicate telepathically. And now I can use soft pastels to blend everything together and really bring the sculpt to life. I did draw her with eyebrows on the mock-up, but I decided it didn't really make sense. I mean, she's a mushroom with no other hair, so why would she have brows? So instead, I'm going to use white highlights to try and give her the same expression without the actual eyebrow. I also blushed the body, which I had originally planned to keep really pale, but I thought the dirty look fit the gloomy vibes too well, so I ended up adding a lot more darker shades. I used white pastels to soften the edge highlights. Then return to the face for some painted highlights. Soften them with more pastels. And back to the body to finish the legs. First with some blushing. And then by coating the black goo parts with UV resin, so it's extra glossy and protects the paint. I applied the same paint job to the arms and then repeated the glossing up of the black areas. But I also mixed some resin with some black ink to make the fingers extra drippy, as they will constantly be oozing and changing form. Now she's complete with some deliciously goopy hands, let's make some eyes. I used my Dremel to carve out the pupil and iris. Started with a grey base and then worked some black from the top down. Covered the irises in white. Filled the pupils with black. And shaded with pastels. Applied a base coat of resin. Filled the iris with more resin, and then swirled some black ink into it. I was really nervous doing this as it's not something I've tried before, but I simply had to give her ink blot style eyes. I like to imagine that if she gets really angry or scared, then the black ink would just spread out and fill up her entire eye. After pushing the eyes back into place, I used the black resin mix to add the ink tears. I'm aiming for that oversized dramatic Ghibli style of tears. But don't worry, she's not sad, her eyes just leak constantly. And that's her face and body finished. I already love her so much, she's too adorable, but she's not a complete shroom without a cap. So I smushed some foil into a somewhat correct shape, making sure it fits to her head. Covered it in Fimo and added a whole lot of lines to make the gills, which was a surprisingly satisfying process. Before baking the clay, I pressed it against the head again to make sure it's still a comfortable fit. And now that I've got a solid base, I can build up the main part of the cap. Starting with a completely unnecessary layer of clay that I ended up fully covering. Then adding all the little flappy frilly bits. So I did kind of ignore the actual life cycle of a shaggy ink cap here. I really wanted to do the full frilly cap with all the white stringy looking bits, it just looked really fun to sculpt and to paint. But technically the ink doesn't actually go full ooze until later on when the cap is flatter and much darker and mouldy looking. I obviously want to keep all that glorious goo, so I'm going to mix the different stages together. Apparently she is both young and old. She exists outside of time. I don't know, I just thought it'd look cool. Add some textured dirt onto the smooth patch on top, and that's about it. Only I realised that the flaps are too even and neat, so I joined a few together to make big flaps, which looks much more natural. I used wire to attach some clay drips. Just the largest ones though, as I'll be adding the rest with resin like I did on the hands. Smooth them down. Bake, and now to paint. I'm using the same colours I mixed up for the body, starting with the lightest shade on top, blending into the grey-brown, and into black at the base. I then made a wash in a darker shade of each colour to deepen some of the crevices. Then dry brushed with white. Solid white edge highlights to match the body frills. And I decided to go over the lines as well to really make those stringy bits extra stringy. Muddy up the top flap with various browns. Splatter for extra dirt. More edge highlights. Add some tonal variation and shadowing with soft pastels. And I'm pretty damn happy with the paintwork, so let's make that goo shine. Same as before, I'm glossing up all the black areas, including the gills. Then after attaching a few wires, I'm using the black resin mix to maximise the drip. Most of which I did off camera, as trying to catch resin drips with a UV torch whilst worrying about a camera in front of my face is less than ideal. But there you have it, my interpretation of an ink cap. After finishing, I realised that the base area should probably be sticking further out than it is, more away from the frills, but honestly, I'm so happy with it, I'm not really worried about realism. Which means it's time to check out the finished look. I hope you enjoyed watching INKY come to life, and I will be back soon with my cursed mushroom, a totally fictitious shroom that was intended to be a Halloween video. But until then, see you next time.